Well, the Pac-12 has delayed their media rights deal announcement again. They don't have a deal yet. They might be working with a new player, could be the CW. It's an interesting thought and not a bad one.
Our Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights free and beloved Conference of Champions. If you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is half me, half my man JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes, talking about all things Pac-12 today. And JT, let's hop right in with the prospect of the CW. Now, this was reported after the Stuart Mandel tweet. Stuart Mandel of The Athletic, he said we shouldn't expect an announcement on the media rights front until late spring, early summer, end of May, maybe early June, somewhere along that timeline. We'll talk about that later in the show as well. But then right after, Front Office Sports tweeted out that the CW might be involved, which, you know, on the one hand is not that surprising, and on the other hand is also, frankly, not that surprising because clearly they're looking for a new partner here. Then it's been kind of muddy about whether or not they're actually involved there. But my general takeaway here, nobody knows anything. So let's talk about the idea of whether or not the CW is viable there. I don't think it'd be the worst thing in the world for the Pac-12. What do you think?
It's not the worst thing in the world. I absolutely agree. I will say I don't think it's anywhere near the best thing either. I don't think it's optimal ideal for things we've talked about in the past. I just think the Pac-12 is there's a certain perception around it. And I think one of the things that does hurt is you will have people on the East Coast who are going to be like, oh, what games we're going to watch. Their first instinct is to go to ESPN, is to go to ABC and those kind of channels and games. And just in general, those are the fans who, for right or not, which obviously we think is wrong, they do dismiss the Pac-12. And I think if it's on the CW, it's going to be more a reason for them to not take the conferences seriously. Once again, I'm just talking about how fans perceive it. You know, you can hear from all the best analysts when it comes to college football. Listen to the Kirk Herbstreits, to Joel Klatt, how glowingly they will talk about the Pac-12 as a conference. They know how much talent there is out here. But the perception is made up by the masses. And a lot of the masses, I think, look at the Pac-12 as lesser than. And I think having it on the CW, which is not known as a major network, obviously, will be perceived as lesser than. So that's why I don't think it's ideal to do it. But it could, yes, it could be worse. There's definitely other networks that could be less ideal for it. So I do think it wouldn't be the end of the world if it was there. But like I said, I still just don't think for the perception it would be a positive.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's the biggest downside of going over to, you know, a place like the CW that's a non-traditional partner. And look, we're expecting there to be a non-traditional broadcast media partner, but for a long time that's been, you know, the prospect of a streaming company, right? Apple or Amazon, which is part of what might be, you know, dragging these talks out and such. But I think now you're at a place where Pac-12 is clearly not happy with the figures they've been in negotiations with, you know, various entities. And so I think they're trying, you know, you hear these reports come out, and I completely buy that, you know, there would at least be some interest. Because I think if you're George Kliavkoff right now, you look at the timeline of this thing and say, what's our deadline? Like, what is the hard deadline, right? Like the Pac-12 from a PR standpoint, they've already taken a bunch of body blows. Like once you've been knocked down, you know, at some point it's a mud monster. You throw more mud at it, it's already made of mud at this point. It's already covered in mud. It's not going to get a whole lot worse on that front. But I'm with you on the CW on the perception point, where it won't help in that respect. But where it would help, JT, compared to a deal that would be, you know, very streaming heavy, is it's probably going to be easier for people to watch. Like it's fun and easy to mock the Pac-12 and the idea of being on, you know, a non-traditional cable channel like the CW, but that does then, you know, squash concerns that people have raised at different points in time during this speculative era of the Pac-12 media deal, which is, well, if you're on streaming, then you're not going to be easily accessible on cable. People can't flip through. But you go to the CW or some other, you know, cable partner who none of us see coming, or who nobody's talking about right now, that George Kliavkoff might be going after in the sports space, given his background. And you'd say those concerns, if you had a second cable partner in addition to ESPN, they'd be alleviated.
Yeah, that is very true. That aspect of it for sure. And I do think it would be nice if, hey, because like I said, look, when people look at when they flip it on, they're looking for the games on ESPN and ABC, right? Well, and then maybe that doesn't lead them to CW. But what if those games on those networks at the time, maybe it's a later kick, Big 12 one like that? What if it's not a good game? Then maybe that's where they're like, oh, it's a good. The college football fans are going to find the good games, right? If it's a close game, they're going to easily flip over and they're going to find it on the CW. So that's the thing there too. And it will. You're right. The accessibility thing is huge. I think there is a certain cachet that comes with being on Amazon and Apple, and just kind of like that just seems like it's very more future forward thinking to me. Just being on there, I think it would actually be a positive for the brand in terms of that. I mean, look, like we said, this is the tough part. I don't think there's not a perfect answer really outside of maybe being on every like just on Fox, CBS, ESPN, like all the major ones basically. But that's not what the Pac-12 is in.
Yeah, we're not going to get that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, but having some games on Amazon and Apple, I think would be a positive, but because, and a lot of people do have streaming services, but to your point, there's a lot of people that don't too. So the games viewer wise would probably do better if they were on the CW than if it was on Amazon or just Apple, because there's already so many other streaming services in general. I think a lot of people here complain all the time of there's already too many. Pac-12 football might not push some of those people to then just go over, and that might not be the domino that gets them to buy Amazon or Apple. Now, some it will. I think some people on the fence will be like, hey, I can get live sports included too with those. That appeals to them. I mean, we know what Apple's doing with the MLS right now, so that's something that might be appealing, of getting a more sports package there as well. So yeah, I think especially like you said, just in terms of like how do you get the most eyes on it? If it's a battle of what's better, streaming or having it on the CW, it would be the CW.
I think the streaming component being, forward thinking on the one hand, and potentially detrimental on another. I think that requires some context there, because the streaming element brings into question, how many people are going to be able to see it. And you think now about, the streaming versus cable comparison. You talk about cord cutting, you talk about what the landscape is going to look like down the line. And the Pac-12 tried to be forward thinking, progressive, innovative with the Pac-12 network, right? Now, there was a big misstep in there, so maybe that could have worked, and it just ended up not working because they weren't on direct TV, limited exposure, and that, really, really hurt them. But I just wonder, and you've got a different commissioner now with George Kliavkoff, if they don't look at that sort of mindset in, having a potentially streaming heavy deal, and they aren't looking at a cable partner, anyone like the CW to take some games. Because yeah, you could make the argument that, well, it'd be forward thinking if, cord cutting continues and streaming becomes, a dominant format, but it's not right now. So you're making a futuristic play. They did that with the Pac-12 network. It didn't work. So I question, JT, whether or not they do that again, and why I think it makes a lot of sense that these, off-brand cable partners could be involved.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case, because there is definitely a risk involved. It's a huge risk in terms of what if streaming does kind of flame out. And like we said, what if just the perception of the Pac-12 of people just being like, no, I'm just not going to pay for streaming. So then those games don't get the views. That's where it would be better to be on the CW. Now, thankfully, I still think, and as Spencer, I assume you do as well, I think ESPN is still going to be involved in some version.
Yeah, it'll be a part of it.
Yeah. So hopefully some of the bigger games like that you will get on there, which would be their most viewed games of the season in that capacity. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. I think it's a very interesting, because there are so many different angles you could tackle it from in terms of the like you just laid out perfectly. All the positives, there are positives that come with streaming in terms of the future, and maybe that is the way it goes, or maybe it doesn't go that way, because like you said, did they learn from their mistakes? Was that a one-off thing? Is this a completely new thing? Is it going to be fine? It's a really fascinating scenario to talk about. And it's really interesting too, because like you said, we're dealing with networks that haven't traditionally brought games, like the CW. Back when we talked, obviously Ion, we've talked about them a little bit too. So it's just a really interesting situation. And this is why Commissioner Clyde,
Team Ion Television,
yeah,
baby. Team Ion Television. I'm so in.
Ion.
I'm so in on that. The Pac-12 could be in on the CW. And a couple of you sent in most intriguing and important questions to answer about the CW. And one question that I have is, why haven't you gone out and bought Built Bars yet? Yeah, I don't know either, because they're a delicious snack. They're healthy. They're tasty. And they've got a bunch of amazing flavors. They don't have all the sugar and calories. You just got to try this. They're covered in 100% real chocolate, great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. I really don't know how Built does it. They taste so great. They're always in my golf bag. They're always in my pantry anytime I need them. 4 grams of sugar, 130 calories, a whopping 17 grams of protein. You can get your next order at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. You can also check out specialty flavors at built.com. My personal favorite is mint brownie. They've got anything and everything you could need there. Again, Walmart, Sam's Club, or built.com to get your next order of Built bars today. All right, so a couple mailbag questions here. And if you ever want to be a part of the mailbag, you can too. YouTube comments, Twitter at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. This one, a couple about the CW. I'll answer one first and then we'll get to the second one. This is from Kyle the Spatialist. I don't know exactly what that means, but okay. Will the CW produce their games for the conference, or will the conference have to produce their own games and the CW air them? So the way that I understand this works, and I work in some capacity in broadcast television, so I'll give you what insight I can here on this particular front. The production responsibility is always left up to the host entity in college sports. So having the cameras, having the radio booths, having the internet, having the live stuff, all that stuff is left up to whoever is at home, right? And so as a result, it's the conference's responsibility, but the conference, by allowing, or what the conference does is they are allowing media entities to bid on their rights. So the CW is producing the games, right? So when you're talking about equipment, when you're talking about talent, when you're talking about logistics, all that stuff that goes into a college football broadcast, that would be put on by the CW. Who would they be able to get there? Anybody's guess, right? I'm sure they would look to the Pac-12 network and say, hey, Yogi Roth,
Exactly.
we want you to be an analyst on some of these games. I'm sure they would use, a decent amount of the infrastructure that the Pac-12 network already has in place, from a technical standpoint, logistical standpoint, talent standpoint. I'm sure they would use all that sort of stuff. But if they did become involved, they would have the flexibility to do it basically however they wanted to. Because remember, the conference is not putting these games on. The conference has gone out to the market and said, who wants to pay for the right to broadcast these games, who then sell the advertising spots to make money or at least break even in that endeavor. And that's where someone like the CW or ESPN, Amazon, Apple, whoever comes in. So they're responsible for it. It's kind of a joint effort, but essentially what it is the CW would be responsible for all of those broadcast details. Heck, I could send in it. JT could send in an application. We both do play-by-play. We got the Pac-12 knowledge just stored in our brains up here. We're ready. We're rocking. We're rolling. I mean, CW gets that right. That's how it essentially would work. Anything you want to add there, JT?
I love that you brought up Yogi Roth. That was exactly where I was going to go. I would be shocked if the CW, like Yogi Roth or and Ashley Adamson, weren't involved in it, just because those are like the Pac-12 network. Those are rock stars too. Now there will be some change, right? It's not going to be copy and paste like the entire same. The broadcast team, maybe there's different play-by-play broadcasters. Maybe they'll bring in some new color analysts, like someone like Brock Osweiler just got in the game with ESPN last year. That's obviously a bigger Pac-12 name. Maybe they would want to bring someone like him in, or some other potential former Pac-12 players. Maybe Alex Smith gets more involved with broadcasting, someone like that. Those are the kind of people who would be brought in some changing possibility. I think about how when Amazon just opened it up for football, they brought in a ton of new faces like Ryan Fitzpatrick, Richard Sherman. But who else did they bring in? Tony Gonzalez, who used to be with Fox Sports, and Carissa Thompson. So you brought in some old faces, some experienced ones who've done.
Al Michaels from NBC, and then Kirk Herbstreit from ESPN. Yep.
Exactly. So it's not going to be, especially you probably won't be like brand new. If you're going to bring in brand new people, you probably bring them into the studio show because you just want to let them talk about it. Especially if you're your A team, you don't probably want a rookie color analyst or play-by-play broadcaster going out there. So yeah, I think we would definitely see some crossover in terms of some of the faces of the Pac-12 network, while also some maybe new and up and coming faces as well.
Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense. Now, the other question that came in about this this wonderful channel was from Tanis Leach, and these were all via the YouTube comments, I believe. He threw some numbers out there about the reach the CW has, comparing that to the other ones and whatnot. But basically, he says, as a result, I think exposure potential, emphasis on potential, is still the same compared to some of the other cable networks, but more marketing would be required. My personal opinion is if the Pac goes this route, they should not be their first tier partner and only gets one game a week, would love to get your thoughts. I'll let you kind of start on that, JT. If the Pac-12, the whatever the marquee game of the week in the Pac-12 is, let's say it's College Game Day.
Mhm.
Do you think it would make a tangible difference if it aired on the CW versus ESPN?
I think it would be probably a decent viewership difference personally. I like I said, the exact number, I'm not 100% sure, but I definitely think ESPN, it just draws more. I think more people go over to ESPN. You get a lot more of the channel surfers too, who are like, what game are we looking for? I think the ESPN game would, like you said, it's going to be more the marquee game. Now the CW game would still draw some, but as we said, I just don't think as many people think of that for college football. And look, maybe if the games are good enough on the Pac-12 this season as we expect them to be, the conference is loaded. We've talked about that a lot, obviously. Maybe that would draw them over to the CW. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt to me that it wouldn't do better on ESPN.
I would think so, but at the same time, if the CW is accessible via cable, right? What you're coming down to with regards to whether or not people across the country will tune in to watch your game is, are you first of all, the most important thing, even more important than streaming versus cable, I think, are you creating matchups that people want to watch?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is the most important element here. Then the second thing is, are people going to be able to view it? And then the third thing is, what sort of product are you actually, putting out there? Is entertaining, exciting, and all that sort of stuff. I hear what you're saying, Tanis. I assume it's Tanis. Might be, yeah, it's probably Tanis. So, sorry. I hear what you're saying on, you'd want the biggest game to be on ESPN. With you there, but I think it's more back to what we were talking about, JT. I think it's more the perception hit, right? Of, you have your big game of the week, right? Like the most viewed game, probably going to involve Oregon in some capacity. Let's take Oregon, Washington. That's been the most viewed game in the conference the last couple of years. If that game is played in 2025 on the CW, do you have a great number of people who are not able to watch? I don't think so. No, my understanding is that the CW's reach is as extensive as any other cable entity that you're going to find. So if people can do that and they know the matchup is big and Oregon and Washington are both top 10 teams, then I think that's how you're going to get 3 to 4 million people to tune in, whereas normally, a good Pac-12 game is getting between 1 to 2 million, right? That's just how I feel about it. Like, I think the perception would be worse. People would make jokes like, "Oh, is there a Riverdale rerun on afterwards?" And by the way, look, I get the jokes. I make them too. I also love the idea. I like the idea, Ion Television going Pac-12 football right into Criminal Minds.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I love even more. When you're talking about late night, when everything is just funnier at all times, CW, Pac-12 football, Family Guy. Oh, baby. Fire me up. Fire me up for that. I mean, those are like two of my favorite things to watch on television my entire life, college football and Family Guy. Like, that sounds outstanding. But I mean, I'd rather the game be on ESPN, I guess, but I don't know enough about whether or not there would be a significant drop off in how easily people could access the game. I think it'd be more about, what time window can you put it in, right? Because the Pac-12 tends to play later in the day, of course. That's part of its value, but it's also part of the downside from a scheduling standpoint is you don't have, the afternoon or late evening crowd in the middle of the country or out east who can watch your games. So if you went on the CW as opposed to ESPN, who's bidding on you in some capacity almost exclusively because of the late night window, would the CW be able to put that game more in prime time than ESPN would? I think that'd be almost a larger consideration.
That's fair. They can shift it around more. That is a very good point. I will ask you this, Spencer. Do you remember last year what the Oregon-Washington game did? And was that played on ESPN?
It was on FS1.
Really?
I believe it was on FS1. I think it was
at the time.
What's that?
Wasn't it a top 15 matchup when it happened at the time?
Top 25. Oregon was top 10 and Washington was 25th, I believe, because Washington had lost to Arizona State and was still clawing their way back. But that was, of course, the catapult for their season, really winning that game. But yeah, that game was on FS1. Pretty sure that was Jason Benetti, Brock Heward on the call. Great broadcasting tandem, by the way.
They do a good job. Did the Pac-12 championship game as well. They do a good job. And I do, like you said, it's very interesting because if those two teams are as good as we expect them to be this year, that should be a top 15, even it could be a top 10 matchup by the time they both encounter each other. That would be the hope. And obviously this is projecting down the future for when it would be on the CW or things like that. But you would hope that, yeah, it would still get to that 3-4. Like I said, I think if it's on ESPN, I think a game of that magnitude would clear 5 million just because you do draw just the general sports fans.
I think it did between 3 and 4.
3 and 4. Yeah, I think like if they're both top 15, I would say like when it's at the time, I think that would be over 5 million on ESPN. But like you said, it's all interesting. It depends on the storylines. It depends on the rankings, what the situation is. There's so many factors that go into this that aren't just related to just, hey, what TV network are you on? Storylines are what drive sports. It's why we see some of these crazy, like so many times you see these games that end up at the start of the season, you would have never thought they'd be the most viewed. Like I have a feeling Colorado is going to be involved in the most viewed game this season, probably. Spencer, do you agree with that?
Early in the year, maybe. I mean, I think that TCU Colorado game week 1, that could do a big number.
Could do huge, yeah.
Game 1, Dion. Game 1 post national championship run for TCU.
Yep.
Yeah, that could do a lot of things. And by the way, this is from CBS Sports and our good friend Dennis Dodd. Not that I know him personally, that was more just sarcastic. Like we talk about Dennis Dodd all the time because he reports
Dennis Dodd a lot.
Yes, everybody knows who he is by now. The last 2 seasons, the 5 most viewed games, 4 of them involved Oregon. One of them, oddly enough, I'm going to actually see if you can guess one of them, but 2022 Oregon-Washington, 3.63 million. The year before, when they played up in Seattle, that game was on ESPN. That was 4.82 million. Oregon State this past year, 3.56. Oregon-Washington 2021, 2.63. Can you guess what game? I won't make you guess the year, but what matchup? It does not include Oregon. It does not include Washington. Was the most viewed game in the last 2 years in the Pac-12.
I'm just look. It's in the background of my show, so I'm going to say Utah versus USC.
No. This is excluding USC and UCLA.
Oh, okay.
So of the 10 remaining teams.
Gosh. Oh man, this is a shot in the dark. But I'll go Arizona State.
No, it is Stanford and Cal 2021, a pair of non-bowl teams, which speaks to something I've mentioned before here on the show. If those 2 schools, just one of them, frankly, if just one of them could ever figure it out, it'd be great for TV ratings. It'd be great for the conference. I think Stanford's a more valuable football brand given what they did from the 2010 to 2015 timeline. But the power of the Bay Area media market is still very much there. But yeah, three games here in the last.
It would have gone over 40 minutes if you had waited for me to guess that matchup. By the
way, yeah, because they weren't even good. But yeah, just goes to show you what why we're talking about Oregon and Washington all the time, and their importance to the conference, their value there. Last 2 years, 5 most viewed games, 4 involve Oregon. 3 involve Washington. Not an accident there. But Stanford Cal, yeah, drew 2.74 million in 2021. So interesting tidbit there. Okay, let's close with some big picture thoughts here with you, JT, on the media rights front. What did you make of the delay overall? Did it raise your concern level about conferences coming to try and poach Pac-12 schools even harder? There's a tweet from Rick George, the Colorado athletic director, the other day, shutting down the idea that they were about to vote on leaving. So where do you kind of stand on the conference right now?
I kind of feel like they're just kind of in a stare down. Like it's one of those things, like because of how the athletic directors have come out, and you've mentioned this on your show before, how they've come out and so vehemently shot down that they're not looking anywhere. It just kind of feels like everyone's just kind of sitting and waiting, just like the Aaron Rodgers trade with the Jets right now. We're all just kind of like waiting. Like we know it's down to us, so we just got to wait and kind of figure it out a little bit. They're, like you said, maybe it's just negotiating at this point. I feel like teams are coming down. I've said for a while, I still feel like this is going to end up being ESPN and then a streaming service. That's what I feel it's going to be. And look, maybe the CW, maybe Ion, others will get involved in this in the very end. But right now, to me, it just feels like it's going to come down to ESPN and then a main streaming service. If I had to guess, it's Amazon. I just feel like something's going to happen with Apple's. The whole thing fell apart with them with the Sunday ticket. That's how I feel like it's going to be. So the delay doesn't really leave me concerned. It just kind of leaves me like, why? Like, why isn't this done? It feels like we know the names, we know the companies, like all the athletic directors are like, we're committed. So like, what is the wait? Like I said, I really think it's just numbers and everything.
Yeah, here's what I think. Here's what I think happened. when everyone was saying, the deal's in its final stages, it's coming soon, we expect it in the next few weeks and whatnot, I think that was true. I think that they were in the final stages of it. But then the dollar figures came, and
Yep.
I think somebody within the conference or multiple somebodies, right, as in schools, member institutions, said, no, let's see if we can do better. And there's no harm really, right, to going back out and seeing if a new partner could potentially give you more because you're the only conference on the market right now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. You're right. It does. It does. That's what it feels like. They are the only one on the market. And that's maybe where they're trying to drive up like ESPN or someone else's price with the look. I don't know if CW is actually like just saying like, oh, we're talking to CW. I don't know if that's going to work to like make ESPN be like, oh, we got to give you more money. But like, I
No, probably not. I think the potential interest in a non-traditional cable partner would be number one, being on cable, quells any potential exposure concerns that presidents or athletic directors might have. Number one, and then number two, you don't know what those companies are willing to pay. But if your best game was over there on the CW, as long as I'm able to watch it, man, personally, I
exactly.
don't mind too much. And I never mind having on my guy JT Wistrcill, Locked On Utes, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, Monday through Friday, all year long. Thanks, JT.
Always great, Spence, joining you.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a great weekend and a wonderful rest of your day.